The nation of Hungary has had a long and varied history of animated films that have not only achieved domestic success, but international acclaim and cult followings. Hungary has produced shorts and features, ranging from movies for children to art house projects to science fiction. There was some Hungarian animation as early as the 1910s, but these works are sadly lost. Production of animation began in earnest in the 1950s, with increased experimentation in the 60s and a peak in the 70s and 80s. The most famous Hungarian animator internationally was Marcell Jankovics, an incredibly unique filmmaker who forged his own style and left a lasting mark on the art form of animation. Jankovics was an expert in mythology and filled his films with folklore and symbolism. The concept of metamorphosis fascinated him, and his animation contained stunning scenes of creatures or objects transforming into something else. Jankovics used many different styles throughout his career, and sometimes even within the same film, and his animation ranged from simple to very complex. He championed traditional animation and was vocally opposed to computer animation. A lot of his work is very specific to his home country, with many references to Hungarian history and folklore. But Jankovics' work is still accessible because of the amazing art and universal themes. In 1973, Jankovics made Johnny Corncob, the first feature-length Hungarian animated film. It was based on an 1845 poem by Sándor Reisenbüchler, who is considered Hungary's national poet, and commissioned for the 150th anniversary of the poet's birth. The plot features Johnny joining the Hungarian army and helping the French to fight the Turks, and we get battle scenes with silly, cartoonish violence. The film is unambiguously patriotic, and in one of the battles, the Hungarian army floats up from the ground and forms the nation's flag in the sky. Johnny Corncob is often described as having a style reminiscent of the 1968 film Yellow Submarine, and characters are similar in being very bottom-heavy with small heads and huge legs. Jankovics stated he did this to give a low-angle perspective on the characters, to make them look heroic with their head up in the air but feet firmly on the ground. The animation is incredibly fluid, and people are depicted with constantly flowing clothing. The characters are simple and one-dimensional, and don't really change over the course of the film, fitting in with the fable-like feel. Fantastical beings such as giants, witches, and fairies are also included. His 1974 short Sisyphus earned him an Oscar nomination, and was made in response to the difficulties of the Johnny Corncob production. It's adapted from the Greek myth of a Corinthian king forced by Zeus to eternally roll a boulder up a hill. The black and white short has no transformations per se, but Sisyphus is constantly changing shape and getting more or less detailed. 3 years later, Jankovics released another acclaimed black and white short called The Struggle, which earned him the Palme d'Or for the best short film at Cannes Film Festival. This one's message is a bit less obvious than Sisyphus, and depicts a sculpture coming to life and chiseling back at the sculptor. His second feature, Son of the White Mare, inspired by folk tales, was not as popular in Hungary as Johnny Corncob, but is his most well-known film internationally. The reduced popularity in Hungary may be due to the fact that it is much more experimental. Unlike Johnny Corncob that had a clear precedent in Yellow Submarine, Son of the White Mare had a completely unique visual style. The film is full of symbolism and heavy on astronomical imagery and references to constellations. The animation here is quite simply mind-boggling, with frequent scenes of things transforming and morphing or changing color. For example, at one point the three main characters join arms and turn into a sun and back again, and then one of them grows a second face to address both of his brothers. Jankovics combines influences from various art movements, like Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and pop art. There are a lack of contour lines on characters, which was highly unusual in animation and makes them blend into the environment. The colors in White Mare are amazing, with extensive use of large fields of one solid color. I think it's fair to say that no one has made a film quite like this before, or even in the decades since. The animation is often described as psychedelic, and while this isn't necessarily wrong per se, the visuals were inspired by dreams rather than hallucinogenic drugs. The titular character and his two brothers all have powers like immense strength, breathing fire, and forging weapons with their bare hands. They wrestle each other before joining up to free princesses and fight dragons. However, these look nothing like stereotypical dragons. One takes the appearance of a cityscape with skyscrapers, and another resembles a modern tank. Jankovics had an intense appreciation for traditional ways of life and was clearly warning of the dangers of modern society, reinforced by the film's ending. Government censors reportedly forced Jankovics to change the appearance of the city-like dragon to make it appear as more of a reference to computers than just urban life in general. Jankovics also said that he had to make references to the concept of eternal return less explicit and expressed through things such as the color scheme representing times of day. This was due to government censorship, as it conflicts with the Marxist view of time being irreversible, as he put it. His fourth feature, Tragedy of Man, came out in 2011, but took decades to make, partly because it is one of the longest animated films ever made. The runtime is completely justified as the story spans all of history from the creation of the universe to the far future. The main characters are God, Lucifer, Adam, and Eve, so obviously biblical themes are present and Jesus himself even shows up. The animation uses different styles in each section that reflect the historical era they take place in. Ancient Egypt is depicted as a flat world without any sense of depth, like tomb paintings. The ancient Greece section looks like pottery, and Rome is depicted with mosaics and sculptures. The section in the 1600s imitates woodcuts, and the French Revolution is portrayed with the only colors used besides black lines being the colors of the French flag. After visiting Victorian London, the film then goes beyond the timeline of the 19th century play it is based on, and goes into the 20th century and critiques modernity. The standout scene has all sorts of 20th century icons quickly passing by, like Mickey Mouse, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis, and even the Yellow Submarine version of the Beatles, but also terrorists, soldiers, and police. We then see a future dystopian society where one government controls the entire world, and given Jankovics' patriotism, it isn't surprising he portrayed the loss of national identity negatively. And then the film goes even farther into a transhumanist future where Adam is transformed into a spaceship. Sometimes movement is limited due to the lack of funds as admitted by the director himself, but overall the animation is absolutely stunning, and the variety of styles is unmatched by any animated film I'm aware of. There's philosophical dialogue throughout about consciousness and free will, references to art history, and extensive use of classical music from composers like Bach, Mozart, and Modest Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain. The Tragedy of Man is the least specific to Hungary, as it deals with universal themes, and none of it takes place in Jankovics' home country. Jankovics has influenced many animators, with commonly cited examples including Samurai Jack creator Genndy Tartakovsky and the Irish studio Cartoon Saloon, responsible for Oscar-nominated films like Wolfwalkers and The Secret of Kells, both inspired by Irish folklore. Another Hungarian animator with a unique style was György Kovásznai, who made mostly shorts and one feature. Many of these were mixed media, often including real photographs or live-action footage, or using multiple modes of animation in the same film. He also combined animation with the documentary genre in a very interesting way. In his early short Monologue from 1963, Kovásznai uses a cutout style reminiscent of a lot of Eastern European animation of the 1960s, and this style likely inspired Terry Gilliam's work for Monty Python. Kovásznai includes live-action footage, and some of the cutouts come from real photographs or advertising imagery. History is crucial to the short film, with references to both world wars and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The short faced censorship issues and was only shown for a week. The next year, Kovásznai made a striking dialogue-free short called Metamorphoses, consisting entirely of oil paintings depicting two figures constantly changing form. His 1966 short Diary featured extensive use of photographs and very little movement. In his short Tales from the World of Art, Kovásznai moved to more traditional animation, albeit in a very sketchy style, sometimes with basic environments and non-existent backgrounds. The short is in 3 parts and satirizes film, theater, and classical music. Tales from the World of Art is dark in tone with some pretty cartoonish violence, but also references to suicide and drug abuse. He also adapted Hamlet and speeds through the plot of the play in 12 minutes, but includes most of the well-known lines of dialogue. It's basically a montage of drawings, as the only motion comes from zooms and dissolves. Kovásznai's career continued into the 70s, and his short called Wavelength combined oil paintings and line drawings with a soundtrack composed of random radio snippets. In his 1973 Ça Ira, he used the French Revolution as subject matter, again using oil paintings, and includes multiple portraits of major figures of the Revolution like Danton, Robespierre, Saint-Just, and Marat. In the late 70s, Kovásznai directed Foam Bath, his only feature, which like his shorts was definitely intended for adults. It's not necessarily super inappropriate or anything, but kids would probably just find it scary or boring. It takes place in the real world in the modern day, and wasn't a fantasy film unlike most Hungarian animation of the era. Foam Bath portrays reality in an unrealistic way, unlike Disney animation, which often shows fantastical events in a realistic way. Kovásznai disliked the over-commercialization of the Disney style, and intentionally set out to create something much different from the mainstream. Set mostly in one apartment, Foam Bath is a musical romantic comedy with lyrics written by the director. The film has one of the most unique visual styles of any animated film in history. Characters and environments are constantly changing, not just from scene to scene, but within a shot, and there are rapid perspective changes as well. Kovásznai uses real-life recordings, actual photographs, and altered live-action footage. Foam Bath consists of mainly cell animation, but also has cutouts and stop motion. Sadly, the film was a huge flop, which isn't shocking given its experimental style. Critics didn't like it at the time either, but over the years it became a cult classic. Another important Hungarian animator was József Gémes, who started out making satirical shorts, and later made features for both children and adults. His 1969 dialogue-free short Concertissimo mocks the military and bourgeoisie by depicting an elite audience going to a fancy concert only to be attacked by tanks and machine guns. His similarly absurd short called Funeral depicts a corpse coming back to life, only for the funeral attendees to kill him and go right back to grieving. In 1975, Gémes co-directed the feature Hugo the Hippo, the first Hungarian animated film to get an international release. It's intended for children, but the animation is pretty bizarre and psychedelic, and the subject matter is surprisingly disturbing. The premise is that all the hippos in Hugo's herd are killed, except for him, and this is shown in a somewhat abstracted way represented in clouds. It's set in Zanzibar and the Tanzania mainland, but everyone has either Hungarian or American accents depending on the dub. The English dub had some well-known names of the era and added several songs. Hugo the Hippo was actually the first animated film distributed by 20th Century Fox. His next feature, Heroic Times, was in a completely different style. Aimed squarely at adults, it has a very unique look, with each frame consisting of an oil painting on glass. Based on a 19th century poem set in medieval times, the film has no dialogue, just narration from the main character recounting his life. It was actually originally intended to not even have narration, and was shown without it in some countries. The soundtrack consists solely of the narration and music, and there are no sound effects. In addition, no characters are named, helping with the film's mythical feel. This came only a few years after Foam Bath and Son of the White Mare flopped, and this was unsurprisingly a financial failure as well. These flops led Pannonia, the largest animation studio in Hungary at the time, who released most of the films in this video, to concentrate their feature films more on children and avoid more artistic works with unique styles. Several years after Heroic Times, Gémes returned to children's feature films with Willy the Sparrow, a fantasy movie about a boy who is turned into a sparrow by a fairy as punishment for harassing some birds. In the 90s, he made two more children's features, The Princess and the Goblin and Tiny Heroes. Another major feature-length film of the 1980s was Cat City, which, like Willy the Sparrow, included talking animals, but this one was not really for children. About a world where mice are oppressed by villainous cats, it features some violence and lots of dark comedy. It was likely influenced by director Ralph Bakshi, known for his 70s and 80s animation for adults like Fritz the Cat. Cat City is filled with references to pop culture like Mickey Mouse and Speedy Gonzales, and parodies spy movies like James Bond. Unlike Foam Bath and Heroic Times, Cat City was actually a box office success, and even got a sequel in the 21st century. Also active in the 1980s was director Tibor Hernádi. He co-directed Time Masters with Frenchman René Laloux, known for the surreal 1973 sci-fi movie Fantastic Planet. It also featured designs from the legendary comic artist Moebius, who provided concepts for films like Alien and Tron. Time Masters is a sci-fi film with space travel to alien planets with strange life forms. The striking alien designs include a creepy race of faceless angels that lost their individual identities. There are also aliens that can read people's minds, and one that can shapeshift. Despite the title, time travel only plays a small but crucial role in the film's plot. Unfortunately, like a lot of Hungarian animated features of the era, Time Masters was not received well or a financial success. In the late 80s, Hernádi directed Felix the Cat, the first feature-length film, and as of now only theatrical feature, starring the iconic character that debuted in a 1919 animated short. For some reason, the film uses a CGI Felix in the opening and end credits, but the rest is traditional animation. This flopped at the box office. It was panned by critics, but unlike some other films I mentioned, this definitely deserved it. It's an unfocused film with off-putting animation, and Felix constantly makes terrible corny jokes. In the early 90s, Hernádi made The Seventh Brother, a children's film with talking animals, about a puppy that gets separated from his family and is raised by rabbits. One of the most idiosyncratic animators to come out of Hungary was Sándor Reisenbüchler. He made only shorts that were experimental, surreal, bizarre, and very colorful. His shorts were always light on dialogue, but were very dense, often with fast editing and science fiction themes. Reisenbüchler said he was inspired by Polish animators Jan Lenica and Valerian Borowczyk, as well as Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein. He was also influenced by pop art, Fauvism, primitive art, and collage. Reisenbüchler himself would be an influence on Marcell Jankovics. His films contain lots of pop cultural references and appropriation of advertising and logos. He often used pre-existing classical music, like in Kidnapping of the Sun and Moon, but the soundtrack includes composers such as Penderecki, Orff, Bach, and Vivaldi. The 11-minute short is about a dragon that consumes the sun, moon, and stars, and has some intense scenes with lots of quick flashing. In his short The Year 1812, Reisenbüchler covers Napoleon's invasion of Russia using Tchaikovsky music and religious imagery. In the late 70s, he made Panic, which is about humans abducting and performing experiments on intelligent amphibian creatures. The creatures then turn into Godzilla-like monsters and destroy a city. The city has skyscrapers covered in ads, where real-life photos and logos are used. His final film, The Advent of Light, was released in 2002 and was possibly his most bizarre work yet. The mixed media collage film uses classical and electronic music and is overflowing with pop culture references to things like McDonald's, Star Wars, and Marvel characters, and ends with a super trippy look at the fourth dimension. The filmmaking duo of Dóra Keresztes and István Orosz also used a surreal, trippy style. Their animation was very colorful, often with a flat look, and like the work of Marcell Jankovics, contained lots of transformations and morphing. A perfect example of this style is their 1985 short Wizards, which, like a lot of their work, has no dialogue or clear narrative. Their short Golden Bird from 2 years later does have a story set in medieval times with a dragon and a princess, but still has a surreal style with rapid editing and transformation. The duo's 1999 short Faces is a kaleidoscopic journey through history with references to mythology, history, and religion. Director Ottó Foky created several stop-motion shorts starting in the 1960s. In his dialogue-free mid-60s short The Apple Thief, he depicts a pair of gloves that move on their own and pull off a heist of an apple. Also lacking dialogue is Scenes with Beans from 1976, which shows us a world with beans instead of people. The beans go about their lives just like humans, and even get in car accidents and start riots. They're also observed by a metal bird in space, so there are sci-fi elements as well. Animator József Nepp was active from the early 60s to the 80s, and often infused his work with dark humor. His earliest effort was the 1961 short Passion, which stars the inspiration for Gustav, a popular character that starred in dozens of shorts for theaters and TV throughout the 60s and 70s. Many important Hungarian animators worked on the show, like Marcell Jankovics and the director of Cat City. Nepp's 1966 short 5 Minutes Thrill is a perfect example of his dark humor. The only dialogue is in the frame story from a director talking to the audience, and the rest of it is just people killing each other in various ways with no context. Some of the killers are everyday people, but there are also aliens and mobsters. In 1984, Nepp directed Snow White, his only theatrical feature. It's a parody of the famous fairy tale, but with a very different storyline, and plenty of Nepp's trademark twisted humor. Intended for adults, the film has swear words and multiple scenes of characters getting drunk. A key director of the 70s and 80s was Attila Dargay, who directed 10 episodes of Gustav. He also made several features for children that were pretty simplistic and lighthearted. His first feature, Matty the Goose Boy, came out in 1977, and was yet another adaptation of a 19th century Hungarian poem. The story centers on a peasant boy who wants revenge on a local lord for beating him. Dargay's film was very successful in theaters, and uses the Hungarian Rhapsodies from the most famous Hungarian composer Franz Liszt on the soundtrack. In the early 80s, he directed his next feature, The Little Fox, which was adapted from a novel for kids. The film has talking animals and is actually kind of disturbing with its portrayal of animal deaths, but is supposedly less violent than the source material. It was originally shown on TV as a miniseries, but was released in theaters afterwards to huge success, being seen by around a quarter of all Hungarians at the time. A few years later, Dargay directed The Treasure of Swamp Castle, which adapted a 19th century Hungarian novel. The animals don't talk here, but are an important part of the film that also includes Romani characters and an evil aristocrat as the villain. Dargay's final feature was 1988's Captain of the Forest, another film with talking animals, and is about a police dog going after a criminal cat. Hungary produced multiple shorts in the 70s and 80s that won international awards, including an Oscar. The Oscar winner was The Fly, a 1980 short entirely from the perspective of a fly. It presents a distorted monochrome perspective, with the short having a yellow tint. The Fly has no music or dialogue, so sound effects are the only thing on the soundtrack. The short definitely shows off the possibilities of the medium of animation, as something like this would be extremely difficult to pull off in live action. Hungary also had a winner of the short film Palme d'Or at Cannes in the early 80s with Moto Perpetuo. This also has no dialogue, as the characters just kind of speak in gibberish. The surreal short is set in an office building where a man sees all sorts of impossible things in the elevators that pass by, including planes flying, trains crashing, a naked woman, and the moon landing. But the most striking part comes when we see the yellow submarine from the Beatles movie, and then a crosshair comes up over the face of John Lennon. The film was released not long after Lennon was shot to death, and this is an obvious reference to his murder. Another winner of international festival awards is the 1976 short Hey You, a surreal cryptic allegory for paranoia. The most important animator of the 1950s was Gyula Macskássy, whose fairy tale adaptation The Cockerel's Diamond Halfpenny was the first color animated film in Hungary. His style developed in the 1960s, starting with the pencil and the eraser, and got more minimal and less Disney-inspired. His shorts also started being aimed more at adults, and as a result, this won prizes at festivals and was shown at Cannes. This was also the beginning of his collaboration with an artist named György Kovásznai, and they would go on to make several films together. The minimal style is on full display here, with much of the action taking place in front of a solid blank background. The short is metafictional as well, with the title characters climbing up the sprocket holes on the side of the film strip. This development in his style coincided with a decrease in state censorship after the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. In Duel, another short by the pair from the early 60s, a scientist uses an atom to improve objects and machines, and has to fight a soldier wearing Roman armor. The dialogue-free film is a clear allegory for atomic energy, but is light and comedic. Duel also has a minimal style with sketched-in backgrounds. In his darkly comedic Bars, a prisoner draws a window on his cell only for the guard to come in and put bars over it. His daughter Kati Macskássy also became an accomplished director, often using children's drawings as well as their voices as narration on the soundtrack. In the 21st century, Hungarian animation hasn't quite reached the success of the 1970s and 80s, but there are still a plethora of creative animators making compelling work. A 2005 film from Géza Tóth named Maestro got nominated for the animated short Oscar. The dialogue-free CG short is an extended gag featuring an anthropomorphic bird preparing for a performance. He later made the stop-motion short Matches, which depicts a child playing with matchsticks. There are also some very creative animators making traditional animation, such as Nadja Andrasev. She makes odd, ambiguous, and creepy short films, like The Noise of Licking, an absurd examination of loneliness. Andrasev tackles jealousy in Symbiosis, where a woman obsessively investigates the woman her husband cheats on her with, but in a curious rather than hostile way. Another director making traditionally animated shorts is Reika Bucci, like the dialogue-free Symphony No. 42. The surreal violent film features dozens of very short, bizarre, mostly unrelated scenes. We see various animals, including non-existent ones like a three-headed dog, as well as aliens. Symphony No. 42 even got shortlisted for the Oscars. Bucci also directed Love, another absurd short with no dialogue and only the vaguest of narratives. This one has more of a science fiction feel, being set on another planet, and again has strange creatures. Her short Solar Walk is also a surreal science fiction tale with a vague story and strange creatures. The film includes trippy, colorful sequences with impossible shapes and combines 3D and traditional animation, and even a tiny bit of live-action footage. Also making unusual, surreal 2D short films with no dialogue is animator Luca Todt. Her work is often grotesque, like Superbia, a short about a society where men and women live entirely separately and featuring freaky character designs. In Todt's unsettling short Mr. Mayor, a weird growth on a man's body becomes sentient and becomes obsessed with the man. Another interesting animated short is Rabbit and Deer, which depicts the title animals realizing there is a three-dimensional world outside their 2D universe. It's also a cute little story about the importance of friendship. There's also Ariadne's Thread, inspired by Greek mythology and the story of Ariadne helping Theseus escape the Minotaur in the labyrinth. Hungary has produced several feature-length animated movies in the 21st century as well, such as Aaron Gauder's The District in 2004. Set in a poor area of Budapest, the film was animated in a very unusual style, where characters' faces are traced over photographs. And there is also CGI utilized for backgrounds. The satirical film is definitely not aimed towards children, as it contains lots of sexual content and drug references. It also features parodies of notable political figures of the era, like George W. Bush, Tony Blair, and even Osama bin Laden. Gauder also directed the 2023 film Four Souls of Coyote, which was chosen as Hungary's entry for the Best International Film Oscar. It's based on a Native American creation myth and uses a blend of 2D and 3D animation. In 2007, the first Hungarian fully CGI animated feature was released called Egon and Donchi. The sci-fi film was made entirely without traditional dialogue, as the characters just make wordless vocalizations. A feature called Immigrants was directed by the Hungarian-born Gabor Csupo, who came to the US in the 1970s and eventually worked on The Simpsons and co-created shows like Rugrats, Real Monsters, and The Wild Thornberrys. His only feature animated film as director, Immigrants is about a Hungarian immigrant living in Los Angeles. In the 2010s, the animated film that got the most international attention was Ruben Brandt Collector. The film is about a psychotherapist who is haunted in his dreams by famous paintings, and the film is overflowing with references to artists like Picasso, Magritte, and Warhol, as well as dozens of classic films. The film is also full of action with elaborate car chases. This is another one with a very unusual visual style, and every character, even background characters, looks drastically different, with many characters looking cubist or having two heads. There's even a two-dimensional character that says his mother was 3D and his father was a line. The final film I'll mention is White Plastic Sky, a science fiction film released in 2023. Set in the year 2123, it's a dystopian post-apocalyptic story where no one is allowed to live past the age of 50. The film deals with some very important topics like environmentalism and humanity's role in the world in a thoughtful way and avoids being preachy or didactic. The visual style is also interesting as it uses rotoscoping and presents a futuristic society without falling into cliches. Hungarian animators have gone down a path much different from the prevailing trends in American or Japanese animation. Much of the best work has been for adults rather than children, and often experimental or surreal. Hopefully this has inspired you to check some of it out in full, and much of it is available for free online. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe. If there are any other countries you'd like me to cover the animation of, let me know in the comments.